Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet from the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation Anshe Emet. And joining me are good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Komanowski, Anshe Chesed in New York City. I am still in Jerusalem. I'm recording this on day 565, 565 of the war and 565 of the captivity of the hostages. We've been saying this for all of these weeks, 18 months of this, and still hoping and praying for their release. With every passing day, it seems just so almost impossible. And yet we're holding on to the hope for hostages, knowing that we won't be able to fully recover from all of this until Ad Shiavo Achatuf Acharon, until the last one is back. Those are the signs that I'm seeing all over Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Day 565, we're thinking about them. This has been a very special week for me and my family. We had the naming of the new baby. Her name is Talia Adi. Talia Adi, born on the second day of Passover. And on the second day of Passover, well, in Israel, in both we recite the prayers for Tal, and Tal
That's
has all
good.
sorts of beautiful associations with it, and Talia, the dew of God, Adi, uh, for all sorts of things, but the connection was made to witnessing testimony, and that the prayer that she be someone who grows up to testify to goodness in the world. So a lot of blessing,
Amen.
a lot of goodness, and this beautiful little child comes into the world at a very complicated time. And so with that, we're going to make a hard shift to Parsha Shmini, this very, I think it's a challenging, difficult parsha to try and understand. But we're going to do our best here, as we always do on Parsha Talk, appreciating everybody for watching. Vayihi bayom hashmini. It's the eighth day. It's the eighth day of what? The eighth day of the consecration. They're inaugurating the sanctuary. That is to say, Aharon, Moshe, the Kohanim, Aharon's children, are involved in the ritual purification of themselves and also of the sanctuary in order to prepare it for use for the people. Now, we recall just in the most general terms that the purpose of the sanctuary is to keep God's presence in the community. And that is a life-giving presence. And so there's a sense of the ultimate involved in this sanctuary, that having God be present in the sanctuary is life or death for the people. So all of the ritual preparations for the consecration of the sanctuary are really life and death moments. Everything hinges on them. And
So you need to amplify that a little bit more because we had a lengthy stretch of the book of Exodus devoted to the same theme, the erection of the tabernacle. And you didn't quite get that life and death tension in Shmot that you find here in Vayikra.
so what did you get in Shemot?
Architecture,
You got
plans conceptualized and realized.
Well, you got Suli Mikdash v'shachanti betocham. They shall make for me a sanctuary, so I will dwell among them. So from that we extrapolate, God being present. But I think you're right. I think here it's just a little more amplified.
Right,
That
and it's also confirmed at the end of Shmot, right, where God's presence is manifest.
okay.
Yeah, I feel like there's a tight bind between that the last chapters in Exodus in which the divine presence is manifest and God fills the whole Mishkan even to the great extent that Moses cannot even enter. I think that is, and we talked about this when it came up a couple of weeks ago, that is narratively speaking, the 7 days of Miluim, the 7 days of Aaron, those 7 days are the 7 days of Aaron getting ready, and Bayom Hashmini. So this week's parasha is the like very next day.
Right. It's and we go back to the theme of seven. We talked about it, over Passover. We had the idea that the sea split on the seventh day, and we were arguing back and forth about the significance of seven and the seven and eight. Eight being the first day of the first day of the rest of your life, the first day of the next era, right? And so it's not an accident that things need to happen. Things need to happen on the eighth day to kind of make the separation between all of the preparation and the kind of the period of formation, the zone of formation of the priests as being recreated. Seven is the number of recreation. Okay, so they've spent 7 days recreating themselves as priests. And here's the eighth day. The eighth day comes and when you start this parsha, it's like it reads like a whole menu, right? There's a whole menu of sacrifices that need to be performed in order to kind of round out the ceremony of inauguration. To wit, we have Aaron's personal chatat, a sin offering, Aaron's personal burnt offering, an olah. We have Israel's chatat, and we have Israel's olah, and we have shlamim. Now, those are the main three categories: the chatat, the olah, and the shlamim. It gets very technical here. Chatat being a sin offering, olah being the burnt offering, shlamim being the offering that needs to be shared with the people. And we have a mincha, which is a meal offering. So I count 7 offerings altogether, which is not, in my opinion, coincidental. 7 offerings means that we have a whole full menu here of offerings, that there are personal offerings of Aaron and the priests, and that there's a collective offering for the people. This happens. And then in the midst of all of this, um, the it's important to go through all the details, but the details are really complicated. Um, and here's what happens: they prepare all of these offerings. Some of them are burned. I think some of them are not yet burned. Uh, but if we look carefully at um, the climax of this event, which is Vayisa Aharon et Yadav, Aaron raises his hands, blesses the people, and this is just prior to his performance of the Chatat offering. And then Moshe and Aaron, the two of them, come out of the tent and they bless the people. And it's at that point that we have the climax. Vatetzeh esh milifnei Adonai, a fire comes out from the what is called the Aditum, Adytum, I guess.
I've never heard this word before.
The
What
word
is
is
this word?
it's a word from Jacob Milgram's commentary on Leviticus, which is the special alcove. Okay, it comes from the Holy of Holies. All right,
It is actually refers to the middle name of your new granddaughter,
there you
the
go.
Adi, the
Aditam.
Aditum.
There you go. Vatochal al hamizbeach. It eats, it consumes everything that's on the mizbeach. Et haolav et hachalavim. The burnt offering, that which would be the fully burnt offering, and all of the fat parts. The people respond. Vayar kol ha'am vayaronu. They how would you translate vayaronu? They're joyful or they're ecstatic,
Exultant.
exalted. Vayplu apnehem. They fall on their faces. Then, Jeremy, I'm running out of voice here. Take the next verse, chapter 10, verse 1.
And then, so just to picture the precinct here. There's the big central place where there's an altar where animals are burned, and that's called the copper altar or the altar for the Olah offerings. But then there's a curtain, and on the other curtain comes the more sacred place, and in that sacred place that's called the Kodesh, and there's a golden altar on which incense is burned. So now the action moves from the place where everybody can see, where the animals are offered, and then Vayikhu bnei Aharon, Nadav and Abihu. So Aaron's 2 sons, named Nadav and Abihu, Ish machtato, each one of them takes the fire pan, Vayitnu bahen esh, and they place some of the fire on it.
Ezara.
Not yet, in a second. Vayitnu bahem esh, vayasimu aleh ktoret, and then they put the incense on top of the coals. Vayakrivu lifnei Adonai, and they offer before the Lord in that more sacred place, esh zara asher lo tziva otam, alien fire which God had not commanded them. Vatetze esh milifnei Adonai, and in the exact same phrase that we just heard a minute ago, 2 verses ago, the fire came up before the Lord and consumed what was on the altar back there in chapter 9, verse 24. Now in chapter 10, verse 2, Vatetze esh milifnei Adonai. It seems like it's going beautifully. The fire comes out before the Lord, vatochal otam, and instead God eats them. Vayamutu lifnei Adonai, and they died in the presence of the Lord. Now, Moses says something to Aaron, which, we are generally speaking, when people die at a tremendous fire, supernatural fire, we tend to think it's bad. It's like it's your first guess that it's bad, but I would say a solid 33% of the classical Jewish commentary, the Midrash, thinks that Nadav and Abihu get some sort of reward, that they have an ecstatic death, that they get snapped up. And so Moses says to Aaron something very enigmatic. Vayomer Moshe Aharon, Moses says to him, Hu asher diver Adonai lemor. I knew this was going to happen. This is what God foretold. Bikrovai HaKadosh v'al kol pnei ha'am echabed. In the presence of my near ones, I show myself holy. V'al pnei kol ha'am echabed, and I gain glory in the presence of all the people. Vayidom Aharon, and Aaron falls silent. So, one of the versions of this is quoted by Rashi, taken out of the Talmud. Moses said, "Listen, I knew this was going to require human sacrifice, because in a sense, we don't have this practice, but in a sense, in the ancient world, like offering your life was the real thing. I knew this was going to take a human sacrifice. I thought it was going to be one of us, and now I see that these two were even greater than we are." And then Aaron falls silent. Now, you can interpret that to mean that Moses tells him a pretty lie to assuage his bad feelings, and Aaron accepts it. I'm a little bit inclined to the pshat reading of that Moses says to him, this like somebody had to get snapped up into the ecstatic realm, and it was your wonderful two sons who are greater than we are.
So,
Yeah,
go ahead, Barry, because I talked too much.
I find that not so comforting. Um, but I was trying to imagine what this event looked like. And what occurs to me, it seems like a lightning bolt went from one altar to the other altar. And they died, I think, what one can only imagine to be quite a horrible death, and certainly one that they did not anticipate. And we were talking before the show, one of the things that often happens when we read the story of Nadav and Abihu is we tend to begin with chapter 10, verse 1, instead of seeing the context, where in the Torah text itself, there is no break from the beginning of chapter 9 to I think, the middle of chapter 10. And so Nadav and Abihu want to get even closer to God, right? They're outside in the courtyard when the scene begins, and then they go in to burn the incense on the incense altar, and they think they're doing something correct. And what I always used to tell my students is the Torah is quite capable of saying they sinned. And it doesn't say that here. It says they did something that God did not command, which only means that it's not required. It doesn't necessarily mean that it was wrong. And I think that perhaps that's where the message is that sometimes we like to think that voluntary acts are greater than required acts. And here and in rabbinic literature, we're often reminded that, Jewishly speaking, that's not so. That what is really essential is the required act. And the voluntary act, we have to be careful because it often transcends the border between right and wrong.
But like, the this is just a super important question, I think, of our own religious behavior. Obviously, um, the supererogatory, which is the fancy word for non-commanded but praiseworthy, is a big part of a religious life. If I, give tzedakah, like there's supposed to be a limit. You're supposed to not give away more than 20% of your assets or income. But if I'm like, Warren Buffett and I pledge to give away 80% of my estate after I die, which is true, Warren Buffett did it, and Bill Gates and a bunch of other people have that pledge. Um, that's amazing. You didn't have to do that, but that's not a description of regular human virtue. It's a description of something special. We would like that. We would like a hidur mitzvah. You'd like a beautiful talit or a beautiful sukkah. If I go around and say, you know what, I'm going to wear 3 pairs of tefillin, that would be actually a violation. That's a commandment of don't add to the mitzvah. If I say, you know what, my lulav needs some tulips, that would be a violation because even though that might feel nice to me, it's a deviation from the appropriate commanded practice. I like I told you, I resonate to the idea that Nadav and Abihu get some sort of special apotheosis, but I will also cop to the fact that alien fire is not a word which sounds like they did something nice. Eish Zara sounds like they crossed some sort of important line.
That's where I would go with this. That's where I always go with this story is that this is this moment where they break a rule, they take matters into their own hands. They're young. I picture them as youthful experimenters, trying to really push the limit, the envelope of what is permitted. And the Eish Zara that they take is their own mixture of incense, and that is the step over the line. It's outside of the zone of what is permissible, and we're dealing
What is
with.
so whatever. There's a bunch that we could do with this to complicate it to make give some nuance. So one thing is, um, it's not that there's not incense. Uh, it's not that there's not incense that's supposed to go to the golden altar on the other side of the curtain. There is perhaps, and there's nothing that suggests that it's H Zara. It's not Ketoret Zara. They didn't bring the incorrect incense. They brought the incorrect fire. So maybe, as one wonderful midrash says, "Ba'u lahosif ahava al ahava," that these two guys came to add love to love. That they thought it was so amazing that the divine fire came out that they decided to create some coals of their own, and that the problem was that they should have waited for the divine fire or something like that. Another version of this, which I think is interesting, they brought Eish Zara asher lo tziva otam, which, quote, he did not command them. Now, who's the he in that sentence? We typically are going to think that God did not command it, and the word zara, esh zara, or el zar, almost always connotes in the Jewish vocabulary like idol worship. Avodah zarah is our word for idol worship, or el zar, lo yavacha el zar. You should not have a foreign god among you. But it might be that they gave Eish Zara Asher Lo Tziva Otam, that he did not command them, that Moses had not commanded them. That this is one of the classic descriptions of what it is that they are said to have done wrong, is that they were teaching in Moses' presence. They didn't ask permission, and these whippersnappers who should have known their place usurped Moses' role. In which case, maybe they didn't do anything wrong, they just did it in a wrong way because they were so immodest. Maybe they were factually correct about what was supposed to have happened, but they should have just been, deferent.
I have a much easier time, uh, trying to explain. I should not. It's going to sound to say that there's no way to explain this. That they stepped out of the line and they got zapped for stepping out of the line. It's very hard for me to accept that they, by violating Moses's honor, is what you're saying. This is a rabbinic midrash that they should be punished in that way so severely for violating his honor. It's much easier for me to accept that God, punishes them for breaking a rule because God is God. God could do whatever God wants.
Right, but it doesn't say that. And I think it's important to keep that in mind that it doesn't say that they broke a rule. It just says they did something that God did not command. And what I
or
wanted
that
to
Moses,
do
yeah.
was add on, I think, to what you were saying earlier, Elliot, that the Sarah did not come from the altar. And one of the things that maybe we don't pay enough attention to is that the fire on the altar is supposed to be kept burning constantly, right? The priests have to tend to it both in the morning and the evening to make sure that it doesn't go out. And that is the only fire that's allowed into the Kodesh. And what struck me listening to you is that perhaps the Sarah was, as some of the commentary suggests, a non-altar fire, and that's why. And but they did it, I think, also as you said, in an act of exuberance. They were not doing anything they thought was consciously wrong, and I don't think they thought that they were pushing the envelope, but they were, ecstatic, shall we say, overcome by emotion, perhaps even blinded, perhaps, but that their act was generated from good impulses. And for me, at least at my age now, that's where I'd like to see the story. That this is a cautionary tale of how important proper behavior is because we don't know when it will catch up to us.
I'm
So
going to talk myself slightly into the reading of that rabbinic midrash that we talked about of because they usurped Moses' authority, that the lo tziva otam, that Moses had not commanded them, not that God had not commanded them. I'm going to talk myself into this at least a little bit because of something you just said that you'd rather have. Would you really rather have a completely arbitrary God who zaps people for minor violations, especially even when good intentioned? I mean, like I'm asking, religiously, what's kind of goes down better? God is completely arbitrary, and if you make him some mistake, or we have a kind of a rigid society, and we're rigidly hierarchical, and you really broke a human rule. I can almost understand that, you know, that a little better than God, who I conceive of as being Rachum v'Chanun, zapping people
I,
for.
So I actually don't. I think I would be much more critical of Moses if he were to be satisfied by that as the punishment. And it's because they die. The two brothers die. And that's a capital punishment for what is not a capital crime. God, I don't have to understand God. And it's in the realm of the irrational, and so
Yeah,
therefore, yeah, I do want to reconcile God as compassion and God as but ultimately, what the Torah is giving us is a vision of God who is so powerful and so awesome that sometimes that awesome power can actually
yeah.
destroy.
So
God can be
I
nuclear.
want to
God
go
can
in
be
a
nuclear,
slight,
but let me just go off and then to Barry.
please.
God can be nuclear, and you can live with that, and you don't have to understand God. But I don't have to love Moses, and I have to love God. And in this particular, I mean, maybe this is not my final answer for the meaning of Leviticus chapter 10, but maybe God zaps people for minor violations, makes it more difficult for me to love God. And if I don't love Moses, I don't love everybody.
So this is an interpretation that goes back to Ed Greenstein, and it's not that God is completely arbitrary, but that he is sometimes arbitrary. I think the word that Professor Greenstein used was capricious, because what makes God God is that the rule maker cannot be subject to the rules because then the rules are greater than he is. So every now and then, God will break through, as it were, and do something that to us can only seem arbitrary to let us know that God is God and we're not. And the real crux of the problem actually is in the Haftarah for Parashat Shmini, where the incident with Uzzah, who seems to do the naturally good thing, prevent the ark from falling on the ground, and he's zapped because God gets angry at him. Right? We don't have any notion that God is angry in Leviticus 10, but in First Samuel, God is plenty angry and he zaps Uzzah, and it's mind-boggling to try and figure out what Uzzah should have done that would have been
Uzzah's done
better.
only something good. Uzzah's only
Yeah.
done well, and it
But
is
again, I
mind-boggling.
think that if we allow for a certain amount of caprice, that perhaps the tragedy of being human is that the rules are not always in place for us,
Yeah,
and
this
sometimes
is such a deep religious question. Going back to Plato, is the thing good because God says so, or is God bound also to recognize that this goodness beyond the character of God's own will? I think that this is best resolved by thinking, maybe this is not adequately resolved to some people or to Ed Greenstein, but I think that this is best resolved by thinking that the goodness of the rules is the very substance of the divine. And it doesn't weaken God to say God's subject to the rules, but it certainly diminishes God to say, yeah, sometimes I kill just for the fun of it to prove that I'm the boss.
no, I wouldn't say. I mean, fun of it is injecting human language. I think I would prefer to restrict it to divine language, at least as I understand it, and that this came up in a discussion I had with a student, maybe even today, that you know, Rabbi Harold Kushner famously wanted to give up the idea of an omnipotent God because he could not give up the idea of a God who is all good. But I myself have thought for many, many years that if you're going to give one up, you give up the idea that God is all good, because of what value is there in a God that is not all powerful? And
I go the other way.
That's me speaking. I don't expect everyone to agree with me, although I expect maybe someone will.
Yeah, I'm looking at the
I go
clock.
the
We
exact
don't
opposite
have
way.
enough time to really deal with this, but it's almost as if I want to leave God out of it, even though God is a huge part of it. But there's a human drama here, and it's a human drama between two brothers. One brother who wants everything to go perfectly, and the other brother, Aaron, for whom a catastrophe has happened, and he is not able to fix his mind on what Moses wants. Moses wants,
Develop this. You started in this road without setting the
yes,
scene for our many listeners. So
okay. So
set up the scene.
it's hard to do it quickly, but we'll try. So Mo the the two brothers got incinerated. Their presence, the presence of dead bodies means that things can't happen, can't continue there. There's a defiling presence within the holy precinct, the holy area. They got to be removed. Moses gets them removed. It's like an emergency. They get the two bodies out there, and Moses wants to finish the activity. And I'm jumping to the end of the chapter here where Moses, says, look, you were supposed to do this and this and this. You were supposed to perform this chatat offering. The chatat offering means that you were supposed to consume it. You were supposed to eat it, right? And it got burned. What are you going to do now? Basically, is what he's saying. And Aaron answers and gives a very compelling answer. He says, "Vaydaber Aaron Moshe," verse 19. Hen hayom hikrivu et chatatam. Today they brought this offering of their chatat, their sin offering, ve'etolatam, and their burnt offering, lifnei Adonai, before God, vatikreno oti ka'ela. And this happened to me. V'achalti chatat hayom. Am I going to eat it today? Am I going to perform this the way you insisted I perform it? Hayitav b'nei Adonai. Is that what God wants? Is that going to be good in God's sight? Vayishma Moshe vayitav be'enav. Moses heard and understood, and it was good in his eyes.
Okay.
Meaning, one second,
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
there's Moses wants the thing to happen properly. Aaron says basically, I can't do it. This happened to me. and Moses relents. Moses yields to Aaron.
So, in context with what I said earlier, perhaps this is Aaron saying that sometimes we are not bound by the rules because life intrudes. And we make plans, the well-known expression in Yiddish, which I don't speak and I don't remember the expression, man plans and God laughs, that we make plans and we organize our lives, both religiously and not, around a set of rules that we hope to follow faithfully. And from time to time, things happen and we recognize we can't follow the rules. And that also can be part of the divine plan.
I like that very much because one of the things that is true about the priestly system, is true about the physical perfection of the Kohanim. They can't have this or that defect, and you can't have contact with the dead. It creates a when it goes off the rails a little bit, it creates an OCD religion. I have to have this perfect. I can't tolerate imperfection. And in this exchange, Aaron says, after as Elliot said, very vividly, after what's happened to me, I can't do this. And Moses is okay. We can accept a certain bit of imperfection.
And you know what? That's the human element here, which is why, it's not that, God is not part of it, but in a way, this all gets resolved by putting God to the side and saying, I have to deal with the reality of death. I have to deal with the reality of loss, of pain, of the mystery of what has just happened. And I have my brother here. I have Aaron here. And we have to understand that even to Moses, this is a loss of two nephews. It's not insignificant, and it's a catastrophe. And here I want to go back, briefly to what you said earlier, which is, the idea that there's some kind of martyrdom here or there's some kind of sacrifice here. I want to object to that, which is I can't see our religion having any kind of place for this. That issue was set aside already with the Akedah. The Akedah says, is the revulsion at human sacrifice. I think there is an Akedah hint here. There may be an Akedah echo here that something like that is happening, but this is catastrophic rather than desirable. There's no way to justify it as a sacrifice or as martyrdom.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to make two quick points. So one of the things that the story breaks is the law of primogeniture, because now Aaron no longer has an oldest son to pass on the kahuna to the great priesthood. It will go to the third son. But this is also a segue to Yom HaShoah, which we observe Wednesday night and Thursday, because the popular term that we use is Holocaust, which originally came from sacrificial terminology.
Oh,
A
wow.
Holocaust was a burnt offering. And from what I understand, I hope I'm not misrepresenting the Christian point of view, this was about sacrifice, that the victims of the Holocaust were a kind of sacrifices sanctioned perhaps whatever by God. And that's something that I think as Jews, modern Jews, we reject.
Well,
Right? The
obviously,
victims of the Holocaust were victims, but they were not a sacrifice. It
Right.
well,
was not part of God's plan.
you use that. Obviously, you threw in that word, something we as modern Jews don't accept, which is a very well chosen word, because in addition, and I want to just note to all our many readers and listeners that poor Elliot is up at 1 in the morning here in Jerusalem. We're in the mid afternoon, so we don't want to go on forever. But this is also, we're saying goodbye to Pope Francis
Yeah.
on Easter, on the week of today's a couple days past Easter, but on the week of Good Friday, when Jesus's death is the sacrifice. He's reach nichoach in the Christian scriptures, and resurrected. That is a finding death in life, finding life in death, and that's a motif that medieval Judaism loved, and it wouldn't have grabbed Christianity if ancient Judaism didn't love it. We cannot say, of course, that the victims of the Holocaust are like somehow part of God's plan. That's a moral outrage. But I would just point out that the word sacrifice really means to make sacred. It doesn't mean to give up. It means to make sacred. And we call people Kedoshim all the time. They call people who were killed in the Holocaust Kedoshim, and that may be a good thing, or maybe we want to shut up about that. But the mingling of the sacredness of giving up your life or the sacredness of death is not totally closed in the whole
But
realm of
never
Judaism.
mind the only, in modern Hebrew, korban, is a
Victim of a crime.
victim of a crime, also a fallen soldier, is a korban, is a sacrifice. And we come very close to these issues with that kind of language. I think the language can't resist the inclination here to identify, the fallen hero, the fallen soldier, as someone who has sacrificed her life for the survival of the rest. And that's where all of this brings us. I mean, you can see, as I say, the human element of this, which is that human beings relate to each other, relate to loss, relate to death, relate to life, is so much a part of the story. And it's not that I want to leave God out of it. God is part of it. Um, but we turn to God in some way to structure our lives and to give order to our lives, and really, I think, also to give comfort and meaning to our lives, even when life itself is sometimes incomprehensible with our.
Amen.
Amen. Well, that
Good
brings us
kazak.
to the conclusion of this edition. A very, very complicated. Started out by saying it's a complicated parsha. We proved that. But we want to thank our many, many viewers and listeners for spending the time with us. We know that this is really important part of your Torah lives, and we are very humbled by that. And thank you for sacrificing your time to listen
Making it sacred.
and make us hear it. So, wishing everyone a good Shabbat and a meaningful day. We are entering these 10 days from Yom HaShoah through Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut, in a very, very, very meaningful part of the Jewish calendar year, and hoping that everyone is well, and praying once again for the redemption, for the rescue, for the release of the hostages. May they be rescued or come home soon. Shabbat Shalom. See you next
Shabbat
edition
shalom.
of Parsha Talk. Bye bye.